Daniel never forgot the sound of the rain pounding against the windows that night. It was steady, relentless, like it was trying to warn him that something was about to break. He walked into his parents' living room expecting a normal family. Dinner, maybe a few awkward jokes, maybe a quiet evening. What he found instead was his entire family sitting in a tight circle, faces tense, eyes fixed on him as if he had already been judged and found guilty. In the center of the room stood his sister, Mara, with tears sliding down her cheeks. She looked fragile, scared, and heartbreakingly sincere. For a moment, Daniel wondered if something terrible had happened to her. He rushed toward her, concerned. But the moment he took a step, his father raised a hand to stop him. The gesture felt sharp and cold. Daniel froze, confused. Before he could ask what was going on, Mara began to speak. Her voice was soft at first, like she was forcing herself to stay calm, but every word carried weight. She said Daniel had tried to sabotage her. She said he had gone through her office, taken important documents, and leaked confidential information that could have cost her a big promotion. She said she caught him near her desk the week before. She even said he smirked when she confronted him, as if he was proud of what he had done. Daniel listened in disbelief, feeling like he had stepped into someone else's life. None of it was true, not even close. He had never been near her office. He barely understood what she did at her job. But every time he opened his mouth to speak, Mara's voice rose slightly, trembling with hurt, and everyone's eyes turned colder toward him. His mother asked him how he could do something so cruel. His father shook his head, saying he had always known Daniel struggled with jealousy, but never imagined it would reach this level. Their words cut deeper than the accusation itself. Daniel tried to explain that he had no idea what Mara was talking about, but the more he tried to defend himself, the more frustrated everyone became. It was like watching a door close in slow motion, and no matter how fast he reached for the handle, it locked from the other side. Mara kept crying, wiping her face with shaking hands, and each tear seemed to add another layer of guilt on him. Even though he was innocent, she said she loved him, but didn't know who he had become. She said she wanted to forgive him someday, but couldn't trust him until he admitted what he'd done. Daniel watched her, trying to understand why she was doing this. She wasn't usually dramatic. She wasn't known for lying. But that night, it felt like she was performing a scene she had practiced many times before. A scene where he was the villain, and she was the heartbroken sister. His parents stood up together, as if making a united decision. They said Daniel needed time away from the family. They said he had to reflect, grow, fix himself. They said they couldn't allow him near Mara until he apologized. Daniel felt the world tilt. He kept saying he hadn't done anything, but it didn't matter. Their minds were made up. He could see it in their stiff posture, their tight lips, their eyes refusing to meet his. It didn't matter what he said. Mara's story was easier to believe than the messy truth that she might be lying. He walked out of the house without grabbing anything except a jacket. He didn't want to stay another second in a place where everyone saw him as a stranger. The rain hit him hard when he stepped outside, soaking through his clothes instantly, but he barely noticed. His thoughts spun out of control. He didn't even know how to feel. He wanted to be angry, but shock swallowed every emotion. He wanted to go back in and force them to listen, but something inside him warned that it would only make things worse. So, he kept walking, letting the storm wash over him as he tried to steady his breathing. He found a cheap room to stay in for the night. The walls were thin, the lights flickered, and the bed creaked whenever he moved, but he didn't care. He sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the floor, trying to replay the evening. Every detail felt wrong. He couldn't understand why Mara had lied. They had never been close, but they had never been enemies. She had her life, he had his, and they rarely crossed paths. So why now? Why such a heavy accusation? Why something so specific and damaging? He tried to think of any moment that might have upset her, but nothing stood out. The whole situation felt like a puzzle missing half its pieces. But even if he solved the puzzle, what difference would it make? His family had already chosen their side. And it wasn't his dot the next morning. He received a message from his mother. It was short. She said they needed space. She said contacting them would only make things harder. She hoped he would take time to think about what he had done. Daniel stared at the message for a long time, feeling a pressure in his chest that made it hard to breathe. Another message came from his father, saying he was disappointed but believed Daniel could change. It was almost insulting. He didn't need to change. He needed someone to listen. But no one was listening. The days turned into weeks. The family didn't reach out again. He tried sending one message to Mara, asking why she lied, but she never responded. Instead, one of his cousins called and said the whole family was talking about him, saying he had let jealousy get the best of him. The story had already spread, reshaped, exaggerated. He had no way to defend himself. Every attempt to explain sounded like an excuse to people who had already decided he was guilty. Months passed. The silence grew heavier. What started as a single lie turned into a wall separating him from everyone he once trusted. And slowly, painfully, he stopped trying. He built a small life for himself far from home. He worked long hours, kept to himself, and forced the memories of that night to fade. But they never truly did. They lived inside him, quietly reminding him of the moment everything fell apart. The betrayal didn't just come from Mara. It came from everyone who believed her, without hesitation. And that wound shaped him for the next 12 years. It hardened him, sharpened him, and left him with a question he carried like a shadow. Why did she do it? He wouldn't learn the answer until much later. But even in those early days, something deep inside him began to shift. He didn't know it yet, but the desire for revenge had already taken root, hidden beneath the hurt, waiting for the right moment to rise. 12 years had passed since Daniel walked away from his family. Yet the memory of that rainy night never left him. He had built a life of quiet routine, working long hours in a small office, living in a modest apartment and keeping relationships at arm's length. He had learned to survive without the family that had abandoned him, but he had not learned to forget. Every achievement, every small joy was shadowed by the lingering question: why had Mara betrayed him? And why had the people who once loved him so completely believed her without hesitation? It was during a mundane Thursday afternoon at work that the first spark of change came. Daniel received an unexpected message from someone he hadn't spoken to in years, a former colleague of Mara's, someone who had moved on from her office and seemed nervous, but determined to reach out. She asked to meet, saying she had information Daniel needed to hear. His curiosity was immediate, mingled with caution. He had spent so long avoiding anyone connected to Mara that the idea of reopening old wounds was both frightening and compelling. Still, he agreed. They met at a small cafe on the edge of town. She arrived flustered, her eyes darting around as if she feared someone might recognize her. After a few minutes of small talk, she leaned forward and spoke, her voice low. She told him something he had longed to hear but never expected. Mara had lied. The accusation that had torn Daniel from his family had been fabricated. She hadn't been jealous. She hadn't been angry at him, and he had never touched her office or leaked anything. The entire story had been a cover-up, a desperate attempt to protect herself from a mistake at work that could have destroyed her career, Daniel felt a shock that rippled through his entire body. 12 years of pain, isolation, and anger had been built on a lie. The revelation should have brought relief, but instead it stirred something darker inside him. The betrayal itself had been devastating, but learning it had been a lie, something he could have disproven if only someone had looked, ignited a new fire. He imagined Mara's smug smile, her perfect story convincing everyone he was guilty. He imagined exposing her in front of the family, watching their shock as the truth came out. The idea thrilled him, gave him a taste of the power he had been denied for over a decade. Yet the thrill was mixed with uncertainty. For the first time in years, he faced a real choice. The desire for revenge rose sharply inside him, but so did a question he hadn't allowed himself to ask. Would revenge truly heal the wound Mara had inflicted? Could showing her the consequences of her lies ever bring back the lost years? The birthdays spent alone, the holidays passed in silence? He realized that acting on his anger would not erase the pain. It would only spread it further, potentially destroying lives, including his own. Despite this, he began to plan. He didn't speak to anyone about it, didn't make any rash moves. Instead, he observed Mara from afar, checking her social media, quietly gathering pieces of information without alerting her. He watched how carefully she curated her image, how her success depended on the story that had turned everyone against him. Every post she made, every interview she gave, reminded him of what had been stolen from him. At night, he wrestled with himself. He imagined confronting her directly, seeing the realization in her eyes, feeling the satisfaction of justice finally served. And yet, in the same dreams, he imagined the destruction it would cause, not just for Mara, but for the family, for himself. He imagined the room exploding in anger and betrayal all over again, this time from the other side. The thought terrified him. His life had been shaped by someone else's lie, and now he had the power to return that pain. He had to decide whether to take it or resist. Daniel also reflected on Mara's perspective. He pictured her sitting alone in her apartment, worrying about her career, scared of failure. He considered how fear could drive someone to desperate acts. She had lied, yes, but it was not born purely from malice. It had been a calculated act of self-preservation. That thought made the moral conflict even sharper. Could he blame her entirely? Or had the family's unquestioning acceptance of her story made his isolation inevitable? He realized that the line between right and wrong was blurrier than he had imagined, and the more he considered it, the more he questioned whether revenge would make him better, or simply mirror the cruelty he had suffered. Weeks passed. Daniel's obsession with Mara's life grew. He tracked her promotions, listened to rumors from colleagues who didn't know he was the brother she had framed, and pieced together the delicate balance of her reputation. He imagined moments where revealing the truth could shatter her life, her success, her credibility, her carefully built image. Each thought brought a rush of anger and a shadow of satisfaction. Yet, alongside it, a gnawing unease grew. He questioned whether acting on this desire would finally bring closure, or only deepen the wound that had never healed. His mental battle became all-consuming. He walked through crowded streets thinking of confrontation, imagined phone calls, letters, social media posts, all ways to expose her. He rehearsed her reactions, his parents' responses, and the chaotic fallout. At the same time, he considered restraint. Maybe the real revenge was living well, building a life she could never touch or ruin again. Maybe the best answer was to rise above her deception rather than meet it with action. The conflict reached its peak one evening when he received another message, this one from a distant cousin who had maintained quiet contact over the years. The cousin hinted at Mara's growing stress, the weight of secrets, and a subtle fear of being exposed. Daniel felt the tension spike. This was the moment he had imagined for years, the chance to confront her and see justice unfold. Yet the moment he visualized it, he also saw the cost: anger, betrayal, family torn apart again, and his own soul darkening. Daniel realized that this was not a decision that could be rushed. The desire for revenge burned fiercely, but the consequences were real. Every time he imagined acting, he imagined the hollow satisfaction that would follow. The thrill of exposing the lie might fade in hours, leaving only the emptiness of a life consumed by payback. He began to understand that revenge was seductive but dangerous, and that choosing restraint required strength greater than any act of retaliation. He spent months in this mental battle, balancing the fire of anger against the calm of reason. Every day he weighed the options, testing his resolve. He recognized that Mara's actions had shaped his past, but they didn't have to dictate his future. Every plan he imagined came with costs he hadn't considered, emotional and psychological. And every moment of reflection reminded him that control over himself, his choices, and his reaction was the truest power he possessed. By the end of the year, Daniel's life had shifted subtly. He remained observant of Mara, aware of her world, yet he no longer let it consume him entirely. The fire of revenge burned, but it was tempered by thought, by moral consideration, and by a dawning realization. The confrontation he had dreamed of for over a decade might not be the path to healing. He had come to a crossroads, and the choice he faced was no longer just about Mara. It was about the man he wanted to be. The conflict was clear: expose Mara and feel a fleeting satisfaction, or walk away and reclaim his life. The stakes were higher than anger. They were about freedom, peace, and the understanding that some battles, though tempting, might be best fought in silence. And as Daniel stared out of his apartment window that night, watching the city lights flicker, he felt the weight of 12 years pressing down on him. The path ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing: the next step would define not just his relationship with Mara, but the kind of person he would become. The call came on a quiet evening, interrupting Daniel's thoughts like a lightning strike. It was his mother, her voice trembling and uneven. She said they wanted him to come home, that Mara had insisted he attend the family gathering. She didn't explain why, only that it was important. Daniel paused, staring at the phone, unsure whether it was an olive branch or a trap. 12 years of absence, 12 years of silence, and now a sudden invitation to the very home that had cast him out. He felt a mixture of anger, fear, and cautious hope. He didn't know if he wanted confrontation or closure, but something deep inside told him this was the moment he had been waiting for. When he arrived, the house looked both familiar and foreign. The walls were the same color, the furniture arranged as he remembered, yet everything felt smaller, tighter, constrained by the weight of years. His family stood near the dining table, waiting. Their expressions were a mix of anticipation and guilt, some avoiding his gaze entirely. Mara was there, her posture straight, her carefully curated image of composure intact. She smiled, though there was tension beneath it. Daniel noticed it immediately: the slight shake in her hands, the nervous flicker in her eyes. She was not the untouchable sister of his memories. She was human, vulnerable, and perhaps, for the first time in years, afraid. Mara spoke first. Her voice was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. "Daniel, I'm glad you came. I think it's time we forgive each other." The words hit him harder than expected. Forgive. It was a word that carried hope and pain in equal measure. He studied her closely, looking for signs of deception, for evidence of the lies she had told. But all he saw was a fragile attempt at reconciliation. He felt a surge of emotion, the anger he had nurtured for 12 years colliding with curiosity and disbelief. For a moment, he imagined what he could do. He could expose her, tell the truth in a way that would shatter the carefully built world she had created. He could make the room erupt with shock, with family members finally realizing the lies that had kept him away. He pictured her panic, her pride crumbling, her reputation destroyed. He imagined the satisfaction, the sense of justice he had dreamed about for over a decade. His mind raced with scenarios, each one more dramatic than the last, each one tempting him to finally act on the years of suppressed anger and pain. Yet as the images unfolded in his mind, he also imagined the cost, the chaos, the destruction of relationships, the family torn apart again. He remembered how lonely those 12 years had been, how deeply the silence had cut into his life. He realized that revenge could offer momentary pleasure but not healing. It could fill a hollow moment, but it would not restore the lost years, the missed holidays, the birthdays spent in isolation. It would only create another wound, another layer of pain that would never truly fade. Daniel's gaze returned to Mara. She was watching him, perhaps sensing his internal struggle. Her confidence was faltering. He could see the fear behind her smile, the vulnerability she tried to hide. She had lived with the consequences of her lies in her own way, and maybe she had already begun to understand the damage she had caused. Daniel recognized that fear and regret were powerful teachers, and sometimes they were stronger than any act of revenge could ever be. He felt his chest tighten as he considered the moment before him. This was the climax, the choice that would define him. The temptation to act was intense, almost overwhelming, but the clarity of restraint was stronger. He realized that real power lay not in destroying someone else, but in controlling oneself, in choosing a path that aligned with the person he wanted to be. He could expose Mara, watch her fall and then feel hollow triumph, or he could step back, reclaim his life, and refuse to let her actions continue to control him. The decision crystallized in his mind. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself, and looked directly at Mara. "I forgive you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I won't forget." The room shifted. Silence fell, heavy and thick. The family exchanged glances, uncertain, confused, and Mara's eyes widened slightly. Daniel didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't demand explanations. He simply stated the truth as he saw it. He forgave, but he retained his dignity, his self-respect, and the memory of what had been done to him. Mara's composure faltered. The carefully maintained mask of confidence slipped just enough for Daniel to see the cracks. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes held something like remorse. She realized that her actions had consequences beyond what she had imagined, that the man she had cast out had survived, grown, and now controlled the narrative in his own way. He didn't need to destroy her. His presence, his restraint, and his understanding of the truth were enough. The family was silent, processing the moment. Some faces showed shame, others relief, and a few still confusion. They had not known the truth, and perhaps they still didn't fully understand it. But Daniel didn't need them to. This was about him, about reclaiming his life, and about refusing to let years of pain dictate his actions any longer. He didn't stay long. The gathering continued without him, the chatter and laughter a distant hum as he walked out. Outside, the night air was crisp, carrying the scent of the city, the freedom of choice, and the sense of finality. He realized that the burden he had carried for 12 years had lifted, not because Mara had confessed or because the family finally understood, but because he had taken control of his own story. He had chosen a path that honored his pain without letting it consume him. As he walked down the familiar streets, Daniel reflected on the lessons of revenge. He understood now that revenge could never truly satisfy. It offered a fleeting thrill, but no lasting peace. True power, he realized, came from forgiveness, not as a gift to the other person, but as a liberation of oneself. By refusing to be consumed by Mara's lies, by stepping away from the cycle of anger and retaliation, he had finally reclaimed his life. Daniel also understood that forgiveness didn't erase the past. He would always remember the betrayal, the silence, and the years of absence. But memory no longer carried chains. It was a story he could carry without being controlled by it. And in that clarity, he found a new strength, one that came not from anger or revenge, but from choice, resilience, and the understanding that the past shapes us only as much as we allow it to. The night ended not with confrontation or victory, but with quiet resolution. Daniel had faced the moment he had imagined countless times, had felt the pull of revenge, and had chosen a different path. The anger still existed, the memories still lingered, but the control had shifted to him. He had power over his own emotions, his own narrative, and his own life. And for the first time in 12 years, he walked into the future without the weight of betrayal dictating every step. He understood that revenge could destroy, forgiveness could liberate, and the choices we make in the most critical moments define not only the outcome of a single night, but the trajectory of an entire life. He had chosen wisely, and in doing so, he had found peace, strength, and the beginning of true freedom. Daniel knew the story of betrayal would never completely disappear, but the story of his resilience, his moral clarity, and his courage to choose a higher path was only beginning. The past no longer held him hostage. He was finally free,